So thank you everybody for being here and welcome to the Mark Twain Library. We are very honored to co-host tonight's program with the Reading Pollinator Pathway organization. So to open our program, I would like to read to you an introduction provided by the Reading Pollinator Pathway organization. And while I read this introduction, I'm going to share my screen so you can see a beautiful sketch of a garden. Oops, 1 second. Let's try that again. Beautiful sketch of a garden that's coming to Reading soon. My apologies. Can everyone see that? Okay, all right. So the Northeast Pollinator Pathway Project is 100% volunteer-led. It's an organization whose aim is to provide native habitat and food resources for our critical pollinators, bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, and more. Given that most of these protected areas occupy a mix of public and private land, the Pollinator Pathway seeks to create corridors between these parcels in order to produce continuous tracts of land devoted specifically to those pollinators. Started in 2017 in Wilton, this umbrella organization has grown to more than 200 town chapters throughout New England and the Northeast. Our nascent Reading, Connecticut chapter was formed in 2019 and is just now revving up to do some great things in the community. We are starting our first pollinator garden in collaboration with the Reading Garden Club and Highstead. And in honor of one of our founding members, Rosemary Wright, Rosemary's Pollinator Garden will be a place of peace and serenity, showcasing local native pollinator species. It is in development at Lone Town Farm, home of Reading's Historical Society. This garden will be an example of current conservation and education. Pollinators need native plants and vice versa. The Reading Garden Club, as well as Highstead, are working with each other and at the other Reading town entities and the Pollinator Pathway Group to establish this 10 by 50 garden, which will be easily accessible to school, children, and the public. Reading will soon be looking forward to community support and participation in this project with the Pollinator Pathway in general. You may see the plan at the Mark Twain Library. We've also left some pollinator resources at the library for you to pick up and to enjoy. So without further ado, let's move into this evening's program. And at the end of the program, we are going to take questions. So please feel free to pop those questions into the chat at any time. We are recording this evening's program, so you can also sit back and relax. You don't need to take any notes, and let your neighbors and friends know that we have recorded and they can watch it on the library's YouTube channel. So now I would like to introduce our speakers for this evening. We are very fortunate to have two women who are experts regarding the Pollinator Pathway and its mission. Louise Washer serves on the steering committee of the Pollinator Pathway Northeast, which she helped create in 2017. 1 second, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can meet Louise. Give me just 1 second. Okay. So Louise Washer serves on the steering committee of the Pollinator Pathway Northeast, which she helped create in 2017. She also serves as president of the Norwalk River Watershed Association. And also with us tonight is Mary Ellen LeMay, and she is the landowner engagement director for the Aspetuck Land Trust Pollinator Pathway Facilitator for the Hudson to Housatonic Regional Conservation Partnership, and also a member of the Connecticut Native Plants Working Group. So both of you, welcome. Thank you for being with us this evening. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Should I go ahead and share my screen?
If you would like to, yes.
Okay. Let's see if I've got get my slide up. Sorry. Um, okay, thank you so much for inviting me to speak tonight. I see some familiar faces out there, so some of you have heard my spiel before, but I love talking about the pollinator pathway and this project and working with Mel on it. And so I'm going to start out with just a quick background on the pollinator pathway, and then Mel is going to talk about the green corridor, which is sort of the next step after the pollinator pathway that is going on at Aspetuck Land Trust, where she is now working. Um, so I think I may have stolen some of these slides from you, Mel. So if you are, if we don't want to, you may have to skip over them if I'm stolen them from you. But just to start out, both of our projects, Pollinator Pathway and Green Corridor, are about creating wildlife corridors. And the idea there is that we have these ovals, these blobs, which are the uh, open space and land trust land and parks that we've set aside for nature. And then, but the problem is they're separated by our homes and our properties between them. So what we get is a fragmented landscape. Oh, I forgot that I need to. So the idea of creating corridors is to connect those spaces by treating our properties as the connectors, as habitat so that we have native plants and we have the things that the birds and the pollinators need in our yards so they can move through our properties to the areas that they need in the woods that we've set aside for them. So that's the basic corridor idea. I love this picture, which I know I stole from Mel, of this house in the middle being sort of the goal. So the idea of moving away from the monoculture, the lawn, the um, these places on the right and the left to being this connecting house in the middle. So that's the basic idea. And why do this? This is my only bad news slide, but everybody has seen the headlines. The New York Times Magazine Insect Apocalypse was one of the ones for me that I was like, oh, what is happening? And I think that anxiety and that concern, we first started hearing about colony collapse with the honeybees. What we didn't recognize back then when we were first hearing about that is that there were also stresses on our native bee populations, bumblebees. Many species of bumblebees have been in decline as much as 96%. Monarchs are kind of like the hallmark for these problems. People are paying attention, luckily, to the declines in monarch populations. They're down more than 90% in the last 20 years. And then that New York Times article came out of a big German study that showed a 76% decline in all flying insects. It was a really well done study that got the world's attention. So we as a community here, we've been like, what is happening and what can we do about it? And out of this concern came the pollinator pathway and the green corridor, and came, all of us meeting Reading Library to talk about what's causing this problem and what can we do about it. So some of the threats, just to go over them quickly: loss and fragmentation of habitat, which we kind of covered, pesticides and lawn culture, which I'm going to talk about more, invasive plants and landscapes that lack native plants, which our native pollinators and birds need, but basically a loss of plant diversity, which I'm also going to talk about later, is really the big problem. Climate change is exacerbating these issues, and then light pollution. I added this because I think I was so happy to read about and to begin to understand the importance of not keeping outside lights on all the time, mainly because of moths. So if you have security lights and you can put them on a timer, then you will just save many, many, many moth lives. And it's such an easy thing. So I've put that in my list. And then, so just quickly, the story of the pollinator pathway kind of got covered at the beginning by the Reading Garden Club, which I'm so happy about. The Reading Pollinator Pathway, one of the first towns after I think Wilton and Ridgefield to join the pollinator pathway and to help get it going and to help it spread. But the idea came about around the time that Connecticut passed the Pollinator Protection Act, which made neonicotinoids, which are one of the types of pesticides that we know are really harmful to pollinators and bees, made them not available anymore for retail sale. Your landscapers can still use them. So it's important to ask if you have a landscape company to make sure they're not using neonicotinoids. But that high profile law getting passed helped give the idea to Donna Merrill, who was at the time at the Hudson to Housatonic Regional Conservation Partnership. It is totally a mouthful to get that one out. But it is a group of conservation organizations between the Hudson and Housatonic River that are working to preserve the last forests and to work on issues like connecting corridors. So Donna was working there, and she read about someone who was creating pollinator, like bee highways, I think in Oslo, Norway, to do the same thing, connect habitat for pollinators. And she was like, that seems like a way to, reach out to landowners and to get the word out about how we need to be stewarding our land differently. So she tried it, and she gave away free native dogwood trees, and it was a huge success. And she came back to Wilton and called me. I'm with the Watershed Association, the North River Watershed Association, and the Garden Club, and there was Woodcock Nature Center. And we all got together, and she was with the Land Trust. And we got together and we were like, let's try this. So we set it up in Wilton, and then our watershed is 7 towns, one of which is Reading. So I started to recognize this is a way to reach out to these other towns. We share a river, we share habitat, and this is a way we could all work together and literally connect our towns. So I remember meeting with Rosemary Wright, and she was the first person to contact me about this. So anyway, since that time, it's just like the idea has exploded, and there are more than 250 towns in Connecticut and New York, mainly Westchester and Fairfield counties, but across Connecticut, there's actually, I think, like 79 Connecticut towns that are on the Pollinator Pathway. And then Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and now Maryland, Georgia. So anyway, it's just, people are ready for this idea. It's become sort of a grassroots movement. Part of the reason is that it's easy to do. It is scalable. It can work if you're an apartment and you want to have containers. If it could work at a school or a library, you can have a more formal pollinator garden, or larger meadows and demonstration sites and backyards. And the message is simple. Rethink your lawn. I'm going to kind of go through these. Plant native plants and avoid pesticides. So 3 easy things that people can do in their town property, that shared parks and libraries and schools, but also most importantly, really in our own yards. So I'm going to talk about lawns first. One of the problems with the lawns is that they're monocultures. We have so much of them. We have over 40 million acres of lawn in the United States. So we've really gotten carried away in a way with these large open spaces that cause problems, partly because they don't provide any habitat for birds, for insects, for any wildlife. They also, because turf grass that we use is not native to this region, it requires lots of fertilizers. And if you don't want to have, violets and dandelions and things, then you end up with using pesticides on it. And we've sort of gotten this culture around looking at these perfect green lawns. So that does mean adding fertilizer and pesticides, and those end up in our waterways. Also, I love this picture because it demonstrates the importance of the root system. If you look all the way on the left, the turf grass root system is just really, really shallow. And then when you look at these meadow perennials, you see that they have a much deeper root system. And what those do is they capture stormwater runoff that's coming off our rooftops and our driveways and our turf grass. And it catches that water before it goes into wetlands and streams, filters it down through the dirt. And then that's how we get our water purified before it reaches groundwater or surface water. So because I have a water background, I end up talking a lot about water quality, but it's important. And so that is actually how I got involved with Pollinator Pathway, is because of being concerned about water quality and what lawns are doing to water quality. The other problem with lawns is that they use a lot of water. In Lower Fairfield County, these are Aquarian Water Company numbers. 40% of the water we use on average throughout the year, we use outside, but in the summer, it becomes 70%. So in the summer, 70% of the drinking water we use is used outside, mostly on lawns. Places with irrigation systems use 40% more water on average. And you can have smart meters and things like that put on your irrigation systems that help reduce that use. And just being aware and recognizing, I mean, even working with the Watershed Association, it took me a long time to really connect that the water that I'm using outside in my yard is coming out of the river nearby or the stream nearby, even if it's groundwater. Groundwater is what feeds our streams. So anyway, it's a nationwide problem. We use 9 billion gallons of water a day, according to the EPA, on our lawns. So just something to think about if you consider rethinking your lawn. If you consider reducing the size of it by planting shrubs and trees on the edges, or planting part of it as meadow plants, letting it grow higher, even just keeping your lawn but making it a bee-friendly lawn by letting some clover come in, avoiding pesticides. Leave the leaves. Many pollinator species overwinter in the leaves. So if you leave the leaves until late spring before cleaning up, you will have more fireflies, you'll have more Luna moths, you'll just have more beautiful flying insects around. So anyway, these are just ideas. There's lots and lots more information about how you can rethink your lawn on the website, which is pollinator-pathway.org. So I just have a couple before and after pictures of people that have reduced their lawn and put in other plantings. Avoid pesticides. I always show this picture. This was a bike ride near where I live in New Canaan. That it was on June 22nd, and I was like riding my bike along in New Canaan, and I had to jump off my bike because they had just sprayed, obviously, and they had sprayed this catmint area, and it was just covered with bumblebees. So the reason it is really important to talk about avoiding pesticides, if what you want to do is plant for pollinators, is you don't want to create a trap. You don't want to plant and draw the pollinators to your yard and then use some kind of pesticide that's going to be harmful to them. So it's really almost better not to plant for them if you're not going to think through the sorts of treatments that you might be using in your yard. And so again, on the website, tons of information about alternatives. I took this picture in my yard of just one of the natural aphid battlers, which is this ladybug. So anyway, there's tons of resources about alternatives and how you can go organic and how to go organic carefully. Some organic products are not safe for pollinators and others are safer. So there's lots of information, and I can happy to answer more questions about that at the end. Also, I probably don't have time to do this, but this is one of Mel's and my favorite bugs. This is the lacewing. It's a beneficial insect. It eats lots of problem insects in your garden, in your yard. And as a larva, this is the kind of thing when you sit around and become a bug maniac like we have become. I saw this, I was just sitting at the table outside and I saw this like basically crumb walking towards me. And I was like, what in the world is this bug? It looked like a piece of breadcrumb crawling. And so I actually Googled it and I just said like crumb bug or something, and it came up trash bug. And it is this lacewing in its larval state. It takes on debris like exoskeletons from other bugs and things and coats its body. So when you get into allowing sort of a diverse insect population in your yard, it's fascinating. And you get into this bug watching like I have been doing. But anyway, this is the goal. We do have these pollinator pathway signs. So if you are, reducing your lawn or not mowing it as often, or as you're not moving a section of it, you can put up one of these habitat signs so people know what you're doing. And also just hopefully we're moving in a direction away from these yellow signs and towards the pollinator pathway signs. Native plants, if you've heard me speak before, you've probably seen this because I love the story of 2 dogwoods, which I think I took from Liz Craig in Wilton. But I love this. We use the blue azure butterfly as the butterfly that we use in the logo for the pollinator pathway. So this butterfly has evolved along with our native dogwood, the Cornus florida. and even the little caterpillar sort of matches the stem of the branches of the tree. And this butterfly emerges around the time that our dogwoods bloom. So and then the birds, the berries are a really important source of nutrition for our local birds. So that has all come about. Uh-oh, lost my cursor. And then we also have the Kusa dogwood, which I have in my yard, absolutely beautiful, and it makes those berries. But the thing is, those berries are food for this Japanese monkey. So it's just a great illustration of why it is important to plant native plants, that the native plants have evolved with our native wildlife and pollinators. And I want to talk about trees for a minute because a lot of times people think, oh, I have to put in a meadow. I have to put in a pollinator meadow, which is a really hard thing to do in the Northeast. We're not a region of meadows naturally, and it is beautiful and fun to turn part of your lawn into a meadow. And I've done that, and I love it so much. But really, an easier route and an important thing to do is to recognize that trees are so important for pollinators and for birds, obviously. But for pollinators, for the moths and butterflies, trees are often the important larval hosts. So they need the trees to lay their eggs on and for the caterpillars to emerge. So we've got lists on the website of trees that bloom through the season. Also, now we're in that time of watching all the trees around us bloom. I think I spent my whole life until 5 years ago, not really noticing that trees bloom. But once you start looking at like the red maple and the beautiful, what's happening in the sky, it reconfirms the importance of those as part of any pollinator garden or any yard that you want to attract a diversity of wildlife to. And then shrubs. Mel and I both, when we both first heard Kim Stoner from the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station. She's a partner on the Pollinator Pathway and a bee specialist, and she started talking to us about the importance of planting these early blooming native shrubs like our rhododendron that are the first to bloom, and they bloom when the queen bumblebees emerge out of the ground. So native bumblebees nest in the ground, and the queens come out first before they've laid their eggs for the season. And they need to find a source of nutrition, nectar and pollen in blooms before they can go back and lay their eggs. So that's why it's important to also include the early blooming shrubs like blueberry and our viburnums and all those beautiful ones. So we're actually, the Norwalk Watershed Association and the Pollinator Pathway are doing a big with one tree planted, which is has given us a grant to try to plant. We're trying to plant 3,000 trees in our watershed, part of which is Reading, this year. So we are in full steam now. There's a planting going on in Reading next week. We did one in Norwalk last weekend, which is this picture. Wilton, Ridgefield, Darien, all these places are planting trees for bees, so native trees that are supportive to pollinators. Part of this is that I have a bunch of red oak saplings that are free to be given away. So if you would like a red oak sapling, you can ask me in the chat. You can email me at info@norwalkriver.org. So we can talk about that at the end. Anybody interested in a baby tree? I have lots. But for basic pollinator garden, if you want to just start with the basics, perennials, 3 seasons of bloom. This is our basic list that came from Kim Stoner, and these orange boxes show when the plants bloom. So you want to plant for sort of a smorgasbord for the pollinators across the whole summer, starting from May to October. So that's what this list does, is it gives you that succession of bloom. And then you have your early blooming shrubs and your trees as your larval hosts. That's kind of the basic plan. And then there's also, it becomes really interesting to look into some of the specialists, butterflies, like people are really familiar with the monarch kneading milkweed. Also, I have this little guy in my yard. This is the evening primrose, and this is the evening primrose moth, which once I realized was in my primrose, I stopped cutting it. Now I have lots of primrose. But we should work towards, as Doug Tallamy, if you're familiar with him, author and researcher and professor at the University of Delaware. He has given us these statistics that we need to move towards having 70 to 80% of our plantings be native in order for our yard to support the diverse ecosystems that we are looking for in terms of being able to help the pollinators. I probably don't have time to go into this, but I just wanted to talk about when you do start planting this way, you are going to have all these amazing creatures come to your yard. It's fascinating. And one of the things that I'm getting really interested in is the bees. So at first I was just like honeybees, yellow jackets. I didn't know a single thing. And I still don't know much about bees, but I am coming to recognize that we have a real diversity in Connecticut and that you will see lots of examples of them when you do this kind of planting, 349 species of bees. I just did a talk with Sam Drogi, I'm not sure how you even say his last name, Drogi, I think, from the USGS. He is working with the Maryland Pollinator Pathway, and they're trying to set up corridors that go from Maryland, Virginia through DC and really connecting that coast, which is completely cool. And he has this website. If you look at this, it's jaredfowler.com/specialist bees. I can help anybody who's actually interested in this, but they have these really exquisite lists of the specific bees, their status in terms of how rare or common they are, and then the specialist plant that bee needs. So bees, there are long-tongue bees and short-tongue bees, and there are bees that have to have specific plants. So this is why the goal of having a diversity of native plants makes so much, it's so important, in order to be serving. So the generalist bees can use most any plant, but these specialists are what become really important for us to focus on. Both Mel and Aspetuck Land Trust and the Norwalk River Watershed Association, we are doing some projects that I think are the coolest in terms of trying to plant for those at-risk pollinators, those specialists. So we're working with a team. It's a botanist and an entomologist, and they come and they look. We've hired them to come do McKeon Farm in Ridgefield, which is close by to you guys. And they did an assessment. They do a survey of what pollinators are there, and then a survey of what plants are there, and then do some historical research about what plants, more rare plants that many of the specialist pollinators might need, should be in a place like that. And then he gave us a plant list, which we have put in. And then we're going to continue, his partner, the entomologist, is going to come back and study what specialist bees and what populations of bees return over the next 2 years. So we're really trying to put some science behind, does planting this way, is it going to help pollinator populations? So on our website, norwalkriver.org, we have the plant list that Evan, the botanist, came up with for McKeon Farm, which is next door to you guys. So if you're thinking of planting and you're interested in this, it's worth taking a look at these plant lists. And then Mel and the Aspetuck Land Trust, they're working on a project with these same guys in Westport, which is sort of more of a coastal, different region, slightly different region, and might have different plant lists. But anyway, just putting that out there that's happening. I'm not even going to talk about that, any of these things. I think I'm pretty much out of time, but I wanted to, a couple of ideas for things you can do right away in your yard. No Mow May is underway. It's gotten a lot of attention. The Weston Pollinator Pathway, Sarah Hutchinson from Weston Pollinator Pathway, she's Scottish, and she brought this idea over from Great Britain, and they started doing it in Weston. I did it in my yard. This is my yard, which Connecticut Magazine got interested and did an article. News 12 has done something. So this idea is kind of exploding of letting parts of your lawn, so we mow pathways around the edges so it doesn't look so messy, but parts of your lawn just grow longer and reseed themselves, and it allows those natural early flowering plants like the violets and all those different little spring flowering plants to be there for those bumblebees that we talked about and the other early pollinators. And then in June, we're doing a citizen science project through iNaturalist, which is a great thing for kids. And it just Pollinator Week is June 21st to 27th. So we're focusing on that week to go out and take pictures of whatever pollinators you see and turn them in through iNaturalist, through the Pollinator Pathway project. So anyway, something else I can talk more about later when we have questions. I'm afraid I babbled on too long and cut into Mel's time. So I'm going to stop here and stop sharing and let Mel take over.
So Louise, actually it was a great presentation, and I just love to have this combination of Louise and I talking, because we became close friends all through the Pollinator Pathway. And so to connect this concept of corridors and pathways is just really important, that we're doing these talks together, which is really cool. So let me share my screen and no, there's some reason it's on a wrong slide. I'm sorry, bear with me. All right, let me go to the first slide. That would really help. Okay, see if I can get a full screen for you. Okay, can you see my screen, everybody? Yep. Okay. So I'm with the Aspetuck Land Trust, and that's a land trust that touches into Reading a bit, but the primary towns are Westport, Fairfield, Weston, and Easton. And we are hopeful that we can turn into a more regional land trust, because we are working so closely together, and the Pollinator Pathway has just shown us that when we connect people across towns, we can connect the landscape. So, our hope is that we can begin to protect more land. So I am the landowner engagement director. And the Green Corridor is an initiative that is very similar to the Pollinator Pathway, and I'll tell you how this emerged. And I worked with Donna Merrill at Highstead when the regional conservation partnerships began, probably 2013, 2014, 2015, and before the Pollinator Pathway. We were trying to get people to understand about the corridors and the connected pathways across our landscape. So whether they're corridors for wildlife and recreation, whether that's for bird migration, whether it's healthy watersheds, like what Louise is working with the Norwalk River Watershed Association, and getting people to understand that our landscape is connected. And I would go out to conservation commissions and land trusts all through the Fairfield County area and talk to them about how important it is to connect the landscape. And we all agree that it's important, but we can't afford to buy all of this open space. Land trusts take whatever properties they're able to get. They're not always connected. They're mostly fragmented. So, the concept of connecting across the landscape was a good one, but it was not as easy to do as we, had hoped it would be. So at around that time, the Aspetuck Land Trust, we were working together with the conservation partnerships. And Aspetuck came up with this Green Corridor criteria, where we were looking at the 4-town, actually this goes into Reading. We did a 5-town area where we looked at preserved habitats along the river corridors. We looked at Aspetuck Land Trust properties that were preserved, habitats of rare flora and fauna, ways that we could connect landscapes to mitigate habitat fragmentation and protect important farmland soils. So this was the criteria for the land trust to just dive a little bit deeper into the landscape. And this is where the Green Corridor came out. Now, I think this actually looks like Africa, but it is a green corridor. And the beauty of this concept is that in the face of climate change, species are going to need to move across the landscape north. They're going to have to go from south to north as the weather gets warmer, the climate gets warmer, because they're going to need to go to the habitat that feeds them. the habitat where they can raise their young. And if we can create corridors across the landscape, they will be able to move. So the idea is to get these corridors of connected land that to allow the species to move up into Redding, because in Redding, you have the most resilient landscapes. And even when the climate changes, because your landscape is so resilient and wooded, protected, it won't change as much during climate change, and the species can at least, try to get there to live their lives. So this was the concept of the green corridor. But it really wasn't until the pollinator pathway concept emerged with Donna Merrill and then Louise that we could talk about connectivity on a scale that people understood, which was really in their backyards. We look at this landscape of 6 towns, we're like, that's great. I live over here in this little dot. What am I supposed to do? Pollinator pathway allowed people to focus in on their yards and begin to create a native habitat in their backyards for this movement across the landscape. So the green corridor actually combines land protection. So, the 45 nature preserves, we have almost 2,000 acres in our multi-town area. And it also connects land stewardship, which is people's backyards. That's what the green corridor is. It's the backyards, the pollinator pathway backyards, and the adjacent properties that are protected, our nature preserves, Trout Brook Valley, Devil's Den, those connected to our backyards and neighborhoods creates the green corridor. It's a 40,000 acre landscape, and it overlaps into 6 towns. And there are actually 6 pollinator pathways within the green corridor. And I thought that it was just important because most of my time was spent doing pollinator pathway, and then I came to work for the Aspetuck Land Trust, and I finally got to kind of step back and talk about wildlife corridors, but it was hard to explain the difference. So I overlaid the maps of the 4 towns pollinator pathway, and we could put Reddings in there and Wiltons in there. And this is the overlay of the green corridor over the pathways. So really what this means is within that pathway and within the green corridor, that's where we're supercharging biodiversity. We're going deeper, we're going beyond pollinators, and we're enhancing the landscape to begin to look at birds and mammals and broader biodiversity in the landscape and in people's backyards. So what's the difference between the pollinator pathway and the green corridor? There's not too much of a difference. The green corridor is a 6 town. It's truly a science-based 40,000 acre area that's connecting the landscape for improved biodiversity. It's a combination of private and public properties, just like the pollinator pathways. Pollinator pathways tend to be whole town initiatives that improves land use practices from pollinator health across the town, whereas the green corridor is kind of somewhat focused areas. The green corridor looks at all species. Besides insects, it goes to discussions about bird populations and the mammal populations, all start stemming from the plants. Pollinator pathways, pollinator focus, and the pollinators are truly the starting point for understanding biodiversity. And it allows people to just become citizen scientists in their own backyard and see what shows up. And that's why the pollinator pathway is so important, because it gets people to understand that everything they do, even small steps, can make a big difference in the other species that show up in your backyard. The green corridor is actually the next action step to improving biodiversity. We have the same 3 things you can do, just like the pollinator pathway. It didn't make sense for us to throw in, here's 9 more things for you to do, when the same 3 things, which is plant native plants, avoid pesticides, and rethink your lawn, are the most important, simple steps that make a big difference. And Aspetuck Land Trust, our region it's more like a research project. And the pollinator pathway is a multi-state movement. It's across the Northeast and volunteer driven. So this is when I talked about the town of Redding being a very resilient landscape. This cross section kind of explains what it would look like if we looked at the town of Reading and cut it in half, because you have a really diverse landscape, physical diversity. You have the wetlands, you have the forest areas, you have different types of trees all throughout your town. And these certain areas have a higher capacity to host more species because of the geology and the shaping of the land. And so you're lucky to live in a town that is considered a resilient site, and it will actually hold more biodiversity no matter how the climate changes. So what's critical for the green corridor and for the pathways is to maintain connectivity to these sites, maintain connectivity to your town of Reading, and allowing species to naturally distribute themselves, and it keeps the region resilient. So you are the ultimate location for all the species that we're trying to get to move across the landscape from Fairfield and Westport to Weston and Easton, ultimately to get to your town of Reading and go beyond farther north. So as a very wooded town, you have an understanding of what it's like to see the benefits of having a forested landscape. And other towns, would love to have as many woodlands as you do. And the New England forest cover really was at one point, the state was 90% forested when you go back to the 1600s. And then when the settlers came in into the 1700s and 1800s, we basically deforested New England. And that's always amazing to me how this was done by hand. This was done by hand and tools and horses. And New England went all the way down to close to 30% forested. I mean, it just plummeted. And in some places it was down lower than that. But we have, since the settlers decided there was way too much rock in the Northeast, they moved out to the Midwest where the soil was better, and they left their farms, and we have our stone walls, and the forest grew back. So the coalition, there's a coalition called Woodlands and Wildlands, and this is centered really at Harvard Forest and in the folks at Highstead. The goal is to have 70% of New England remain forested. Now Connecticut's at 60%, and we're starting to fall. So it's going to take a lot of challenges to get us back forested to where we could be 60%. So to achieve this vision, we're really going to have to double our current rates of conservation. And that's really hard for land trusts to go out there and buy this land and raise this money to buy this land. So that's why it's important for us to say, hey, we can't buy all the land. Aspetuck Land Trust can't buy all the land. Reading Land Trust can't buy all the land. But you can change the way you treat your backyard, because your backyard, as Louise said, is a stepping stone between these protected properties. And that's what Doug Tallamy and E.O. Wilson all talk about, is that 86% of the land east of the Mississippi is privately owned. We need to change the way that landscape is treated. And again, this illustration just kind of shows how connecting open spaces and our backyards allows for this movement throughout the green corridor. Only 33% of the green corridor is protected open space. The rest of it is our backyards and private properties, schools, cemeteries, and those are areas too that can be landscaped in a way that is more eco-friendly. So this is the illustration that we liked. We actually developed this at Highstead, this illustration, one of our interns, before the Pollinator Pathway. But we always liked this. Was just a perfect way to get people to understand that you have protected land, homes that fragment the protected land. But if the homes change the way they treat their yards, it allows for this movement and these stepping stones throughout the landscape to get from one protected land up to another. So this, I think, just shows people how even small steps in their backyard can once connected to their neighbor's house and to their other neighborhoods and to the town next door can really make a huge difference in the landscape. And here's Louise's and my favorite picture. Again, here's this stepping stone house. And this is what we want people to aspire to. Native grasses, more shrubs, trees, and look at, they're kind of connected to, I guess, what was an old tree farm back here. And so if I were flying over this landscape, that is where I would land, because that's where the food is, that's where I can nest and take a rest during my migration. So this, when we talk about biological diversity, it basically means more life, more diversity, more species in your backyard. And when we deforested the Northeast and ended up with our farms, that's when the populations of the native animals that were here really plummeted. We used to have mountain lions here, the wolves that were here, we had caribou, we had all kinds of amazing animals that don't exist anymore because we took away the habitat and we hunted them to extinction, or extirpation, I should say, which means they become extinct in a specific area. But we can turn this around by beginning to change the landscape, by planting more trees, native shrubs, by healing the riparian corridors. And the more of the native plants you add, the more life will come back. So you won't have just squirrels and robins on your lawn. You will have other species showing up, like Baltimore Orioles will begin to show up. And the more insects that you have, then the more the food chain begins to heal. So it goes from plants to insects, to birds, to mammals, and before you know it, you have a web of life in your backyard. And there's a lot of research going on now that looks at how important this is for the health of not only the landscape, but also the health of humans. If you don't have a diverse backyard and you just have lawn and maybe a woodland edge, you're going to have a lot of ticks because there's nothing there to eat those ticks. The more you have of the predators of the ticks that show up in your backyard, like possums, the population of the ticks will decline. And actually, I was supposed to have a Zoom lecture tomorrow on this topic, but we had to push it to June because of a scheduling conflict. But research at the Carey Institute in Westchester County is doing research on tick populations and how increasing biodiversity in your backyard reduces the not only tick population but Lyme disease incidence. So it's really very interesting research going on, and you can probably see it in your own backyard if you begin to plant more native plants. And again, this is our friend Doug Tallamy. From this slide, I really like because it shows how the native plants are the absolute source for all the energy that supports life. The herbivores, of course, eat the native plants. We know that these guys do like our plants, but the insects and our native plants have been connected over millions of years. They're supposed to be together. And what we've done in the last 50 to 75 years is completely torn that connection apart by the use of pesticides and by not using native plants. So it's a very simple formula. When we break that connection, the food web collapses. When we make that connection with native plants and encouraging the native insects to come back, the web of life will heal again. And our carnivores, of course, they're coming back. We see a lot of hawks. The coyotes we're seeing these days are not our grandmother's coyotes. They are very much the coy wolves we've been hearing about. They're bigger, they're finding their link in the food chain, they're behaving more like wolves, and they will ultimately balance the deer population. And all of the other animals who feed on these insects, the spiders or reptiles, rodents, bats, all the terrestrial bird, 96% of the birds require insects at this time of spring to feed their babies. It's not the birdseed. Birdseed helps them in the winter and the berries help them in the winter, but now they need the protein from the caterpillars and the insects. So it really is a web of life, and this can happen in your backyard. So these again are the same three things Louise talked about. It's so important to just know that there's really these three simple things for your yard: plant natives, rethink your lawn, avoid pesticides and herbicides. And some of the examples that Aspetuck, we've taken those three things and taken some action steps. This is at Earth Place in Westport. This was one of our first demonstration gardens. We planted 2,000 native plants and grasses and shrubs in 2 days with a grant from the Westport Women's Club. It's right now in its third year, and it's a really great garden now. It looks completely different than it did here when we first planted it. But it's important for people to see that, yes, you can have a beautiful, kind of a formal looking garden that is made of natives. It doesn't have to be like a meadow look. And the other thing that's been so important with the native plants is we found with the Pollinator Pathway that we just didn't have the availability of native plants. And that's where our friends at Connecticut NOFA, that's the Northeast Organic Farming Association, came up with this concept of an Ecotype project, where we were going to get a team of people from Highstead, as well as some other areas that Jordy at Highstead is collecting native plants, creating these founders plots, which are single species plots of, this is Joe Pyeweed, this is ironweed, and these are in Ridgefield at the Hickories farm. And this is a first time project for here in Connecticut, where we're growing these native plants from wild collected seed and then propagating them and distributing them out into through the use of plant sales. And I have another slide a little bit later to show you what they looked like. Rethinking your lawn, again, make it clover. Use some longer, slow growing grasses that really add a lot more interest to the landscape. Actually, this picture I took at the Vatican, this is in front of the Sistine Chapel. The entire lawn is clover, and I think it's beautiful. It's, it had already bloomed, but it is flat, doesn't have to be mowed. They don't water it. It is just green, and it's lovely. So everyone else was taking pictures of the Vatican, and I was taking pictures of the lawn because that's what I do. Again, here's the same slide that Louise showed. And so the Aspetuck Land Trust, we decided that going the next step and trying to get people to understand the next step beyond the pollinators is, we would use one of our favorite birds and one of Tallamy's favorite birds, the chickadee. And it's, again, the same three things, but understanding that it's the shrubs and plants and the birds and the broader food web. And so my mailbox has one of these and a Pollinator Pathway sign on it, and that's supercharging biodiversity on my landscape. And what we're also finding is so important right now is to create partnerships with the landscape companies, and I don't mean necessarily the mow and blow guys. We want to really create partnerships with the nurseries and the designers, and Mo Green, who's an organic and gas-free landscape company. And so really creating this partnership where we talk about the same things and they promote organics is really helping to grow their business, and it's helping us to get our message out into the landscape. So this is this was our first plant sale with the Ecotypes. This is at Gilberti's farm, which Aspetuck owns now, but Gilberti's Sal is still there. He's still doing his business. We just own the land, and we had our first plant sale there last spring. And these are what the Ecotype flats looked like. And we sold out really early on with these Ecotypes, and they're all native, wild collected, and our native insects are like waiting for them to show up in your backyard. And to encourage people to plant those Ecotypes, Paige Lyons, who has been an intern with us at Aspetuck, thanks to Louise, has drawn some planting plans for us using these ecotype plants and where they should go and how big they grow. And we started with one plan, and I think we just finished our 8th plan for people to buy these ecotypes and get them into their landscape. We just finished our Ecotype plant sale for 2021, just finished it this weekend. We had 250 customers order from us. Our gross sales were supposed to be $43,000, and we had a major glitch 3 days before the plant sale opened, that they weren't, half the plants were not available. And that kind of threw us into a tizzy where I had to go order native plants from other places to fill the orders, and it really was very frustrating. But so I think I kind of jinxed myself because I did this slide early on, and these were the species that were not available. So bottle gentian, and then we had New England liatris. And it's just very difficult. It's hard to propagate these native plants. They don't like to be in a hot house. They don't like to be overwatered. They really need to be outside, frozen in the snow. And there's an art to propagating these. And, really excellent growers that can propagate thousands of species of plants are really relearning how these native plants need to be propagated. So ultimately, it was a successful sale. We had a bump in the road, had to do some replacement, but it's worth it to just be patient. And within another year or so, we'll learn the better way to propagate these plants and get them to a point where people can will buy them. So this year alone, I had 7 Zoom lectures in a lunch and learn series. I figured people were kind of trapped in their houses, and I didn't find them getting sick of Zooms. Actually, I would do a couple a month on Wednesdays, and it was a lunch and learn, grab a sandwich and listen to Kim Eierman, or I had the DOT speak, and then we had our friends at Wildlife in Crisis talked about spring babies and communication of trees, and there's Dan from Mo Green talking about organic land care, and then of course Doug Tallamy and Edwina von Gaal. So we really took advantage of people being home, and so many people, over 1,000 participants, jumped on board to listen to some of these programs. And I think as the weather's getting nicer, people are not going to want to be inside having lunch. So we started something called Tallamy Tidbits. These are 2-minute seasonal clips from Doug Tallamy's backyard. Last year we had booked him for a lecture in May, and COVID hit and we had to cancel it. And he was home because he couldn't teach at school. He had to teach at home. So he would take these little videos of himself walking in his backyard, and we weave them together, and they're just fun little things that come out on Friday mornings, and you get to see Doug walking through his backyard, giving you helpful hints on what's coming up in your backyard. This is my demonstration garden. We have 2 of them. This one's being planted in actually next week. And this is our Haskins Preserve. You see, it's a very similar kind of illustration here. This is our green card or pollinator toolkit. We have actually 6 landscapes in one of our preserves. There's a shady landscape. This is a formal courtyard garden, a bee lawn, a meadow, a woodland edge, and underneath this sign is our wetland garden, which is around a pond. So we're going to have 6 different sites, 6 different types of plants. And Louise beautifully explained how this works. Is we do a baseline measurement of the pollinators that are on the site, and over the next 3 years, the bee ecologist will come after we plant. This Saturday, we're planting this Saturday. he will come and measure and look at the populations of the pollinators that are beginning to show up. And this is a way that we can prove that when we add these native plants, some of these the native pollinators will come back, because all we need to do is provide the plants for them. And the beauty of these toolkits is that we're going to put this on our website, so anybody can print this toolkit out. It's only a few pages. It'll give you the plant lists, the layout plan. If you have a wet garden, if you have a meadow, if you have a dry garden, these are the plants, the native plants that you should use. And it's been a challenge curating these plants. I've had to go to about 6 or 7 different nurseries to get them all. But our hope is that when people start to, demand them, these smaller nurseries will begin to propagate more of them, and they'll become a lot more commonplace than they are now. So this is just a really exciting project that we're doing. This is in Westport at our Haskins Preserve. So if you came to pick up plants at our plant sale this weekend, you were at the Haskins Preserve. And just to finish up, the Haskins Preserve also turned into a partnership with an unexpected partner. Aquarian has helped us to create a sustainable water system at Haskins. Now you're saying, okay, these are meadows and native plants, they shouldn't need as much water, but to get these started, we do need to have some water on the property. This property had no water. So we hooked up to the line in Westport, and Aquarian is helping to support this system, which is also going to be installed this weekend. And the goal is to show people that you can have all kinds of different landscapes, but use less water. And Westport apparently has the highest water usage for Aquarian of all of their towns. So they considered this a great opportunity to have a demonstration site for sustainable water usage in the town that uses the most water. And so we created a partnership with Aquarian, which is really exciting. And we're going to begin to put some signage to describe what this whole garden landscape is going to look like. And so that's all I had. This is one of my favorite quotes from Doug Tallamy. Our gardeners, and as gardeners and stewards of our land, we've never been so empowered to help save biodiversity. And the need to do so has never been so great. All you need to do is plant native plants. So the formula is simple. And so I will stop sharing my screen, and then people can ask questions if they would like. So thank you very much. I think I ran over a little bit, but.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Thank you, both of you, Louise, for joining us this evening and for motivating us and empowering us to have more diverse backyards. So we do have time for questions. If there are questions, if you'd like to pop them in the chat, we'll take those now.
There was one question that Audrey had about, I know she's put, and I think that Mel could help answer her question. She's putting in, and Audrey, you can just unmute if you're there, but she's putting in maybe a 1/4 acre meadow in Norwalk at Oak Hills Park. And she was wondering if maybe she should add shrubs. And I was saying a hedgerow is maybe a good idea. And I know we did that as part of the McKeon Farm project. I thought you might be more familiar with what native plants could be good to border.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, what we're doing is we're going to be seeding with the showy New England or Northeast wildflower and grasses mix from Ernst Seeds. And we're also putting in little plantlings, the little plugs through the Norwalk Land Trust is giving us a whole lot of native plants that Nancy McClellan helped them with. In planting from seeds, and we're putting in some topsoil, and we're also planting in the existing conditions. So we're going to see how we do. So it's a bit of it's a 1/4 acre experiment, and Louise is going to give us some red oaks to put in as well. So the shrubs, yeah, I think that would be. It's sort of a big undertaking, but it's a restorative meadow over a former dumping ground. Nothing toxic, but some old construction materials, probably from the 1950s. So not a lot of topsoil on top of it. So this is truly restorative. on the edge of woodlands. So
You know, Audrey, you should look at there's a hedgerows in the McKeon Farm project. It's on the Norwalk River Watershed website. He designed them to go on the edges of the meadow. So if you do want to do some shrubs along the meadow,
Yeah,
I'm sure that's a great list. I should have thought of that.
thank you. Yeah, it's an undertaking, but a labor of love.
Yeah, we have it in our pollinator, the corridor toolkit also has a woodland edge. We were calling it an ecotone transition. Our executive director, David Brandt, loves that word. So it's kind of confusing people. So it's a woodland edge. And so, yeah, little shrubs were, blueberries and different kinds of blueberries are going in there. And there's a great shrub supplier that Planter's Choice has some really nice shrubs too, but there's one in Madison that we buy our blueberries from for Trout Brook, and it's called Summer Hill. And they had some really beautiful stuff, but this year the nurseries have just been overwhelmed with requests for native plants. They've never seen anything like it, and I'm pretty sure it's the Pollinator Pathway that's doing this, because they just can't keep the native plants in their nurseries, which I think is a fabulous thing.
I think that's terrific. We have a lot of native blueberry throughout the woodlands. We just had a Connecticut state forester come in from Connecticut Deep, and he was very happy with what he saw in our woodlands. So there's a lot of blueberries. So maybe we'll transplant a few.
Yeah,
you can do that.
We got a ready supply.
Sandy has a question in the chat about the difference between native plants and something else.
Oh, yeah. So the Ecotype plants are very specific that they're wild collected seeds, though the plants are not wild collected, the seeds are. And so, for example, Jordy Elkins at Highstead will go out with his team and have a landowner certify that their land is, they don't use pesticides, and that these are native seeds, and then who will collect them. They will then go to a place where they're cleaned and then made into plugs. And there's a whole process of the Ecotype. So they're natives. They are true natives. They are our true local natives. And the Ecotype that the region that we're in, is quite large. It goes all the way up to southern Maine. So it's a very coastal. Most of Connecticut, except for Litchfield County, is in our eco region 59. But we can buy seeds from the Wild Seed Project in Maine, which is in South Portland. And those seeds can be propagated in our eco region. So they are Ecotype. But the Ecotype branding is a Connecticut NOFA branding, and it's fairly new, but they are native plants. Like we can buy native plants from North Creek Ecotype. They're not wild collected from our area.
The way the Ecotype project got started is we were all sitting around the table with Pollinator Pathway, that everybody, first of all, there aren't enough native plants for people. And when you get them, if you get seeds or plants, you're usually getting them from the big producers in the Midwest. So all the plants are coming from the same place. And as botanists do a much better job than we do of explaining, it's important to plant diversity in terms of how well they survive, and in terms of how well they serve our local pollinators and birds, that we have local and native plants. So that's what Ecotype project is. It's wild collected seed from Connecticut, and there really just wasn't a source. And as part of that Connecticut pollinator protection law, the DOT and the state, which is the largest landowner in the state, is charged with using native plants along the roadways, and to putting in, they have I don't know, Mel knows better than I do, but they have several pilot program sites that you might see, like longer native grasses. So part of the idea is it would be great if the DOT could be using Connecticut native plants. We're piggybacking on what was happened in Maine with the Wild Seed Project that started, I don't know, years ago. Actually, Heather McCargo from that project is speaking at the Ridgefield Library later on, I think in June. So yeah, I mean, if you're interested at all in this idea of local native species, she's the one to listen to.
What might help is if you go to the the Connecticut NOFA website, they have a great video that's like 4 minutes that explains the Ecotype project beautifully. So I would suggest to go to their website and take a look at their video.
Yeah,
Thank
and you can
you both.
Google. Oh, sorry. I can talk.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say you can Google a map of the ecoregions, and you can see how they stretch across, and it's cool to look at how we're divided up according to the nature of the soil and hydrology and all these different things into these regions where plants grow.
Thank you. We do have a question from Joy. What are you doing about invasive knotweed, mugwort, bittersweet, garlic, mustard, and the like? It's been a banner year so far.
It has been. I mean, I know Mel's doing the same thing, battling them, doing a lot of, I work locally on the pollinator pathways in Norwalk and Ridgefield and Wilton and New Canaan and even a little bit in Reading. But what we in the parks, especially in Norwalk, there's huge problems with knotweed and with all of those, but especially with knotweed. And we have been moving towards tarping the knotweed. So we've got a bunch of different sites where we're using black tarp and leaving it on for at least 8 months and just patching it up and cutting it as it comes through. We also do the mow 3 times a year, June, July, and September for at least 3 years. I'm also trying that in another area in Norwalk that is like too big to tarp. So we're at second year of this mowing, and you can see that by doing that, you starve out the root system. You let it grow, you cut it, you let it grow, you cut it, and you do that year after year. So we're trying that. And I mean, with the garlic mustard, it's a biennial. So if you can pull it up every year, if you can possibly pull it all up and bag it or pull it up before it goes to seed, you can eventually win that battle. And then mugwort is just the worst. I think tarping again, or cardboard with wood chips on top. That's another way of smothering it.
Great advice. Thank you. Also, the garden centers and nurseries seem to be saying that they can't find native plants anywhere. For example, no one is growing native dogwoods anymore. Do you find that to be true, or?
I think that it's an important part of this project that we go to our nurseries and ask for native plants, because I think that there needs to be pressure, ground up pressure on the nursery industry to do this work for us. Give us what we want to buy. And they're not going to change until they really feel the pressure from consumers. So we're lucky that we do have pretty nearby in Fairfield a nursery called Native that was started by this amazing guy from Yale School of Forestry, Bill Kenny, and they will source stuff for you if you're looking for a specific thing. They're just a great partner to the Pollinator Pathway. There's also New England Wetland Plants, which is in Massachusetts, but they will deliver down here for a reasonable amount if you're doing a big project. And of course, there's Earth Tones in Woodbury, Connecticut, where this couple has been, the idea of the Ecotype project, they've been doing this for 25 years, wild collecting and sowing the seed and growing. When you go there, it's like wandering through a wonderland of native plant beauty in Connecticut. So those are some places where that you can find native plants. But I still think it's really important to go to your regular nursery and just say, I'm looking for native plants, and I'm looking for pesticide-free native plants, because some plants, the seeds will be coated in pesticides, and then when the plant grows, it can have systemic pesticides in it. So it's another thing to ask your nursery to think about, to say, I want organic, pesticide-free native plants. What can you get? What do you have? It's part of the project, part of the mission here. And Planter's Choice, is also making the big change. I mean, I see someone mentioning Planter's Choice. Oh, well, they're wholesale. Yeah, that's the problem. But you can ask your nursery to source from Planter's Choice, because Daryl is made a huge commitment to grow these Ecotype projects, and we really want to support that work.
I just bought a beautiful 22-foot redbud tree for the Haskins Preserve today from Planter's Choice.
From them. Yeah, I mean, and he, Daryl early on talking about the working together with Pollinator Pathway, he was like, if I keep running this wholesale business the way my dad did, I'm gonna be like an artifact. This is the future. The future is these organic plants, and he's like, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna go across the street and stop using the non-organic. So he's putting himself out there. But anyway, we want to support him.
Good news. Very good news. I mean, this has been a fascinating evening. Thank you both so much for all of your information and for motivating us to make some changes in our communities. It's exciting.
Thanks, everybody. It's really, really great to talk to you. And I'm so glad about the beautiful garden going in Reading. I want to come up and check that out. That sounds like a great project.
Yes, and everyone should stop by the library because there will be a map of the garden on display, and there's lots of literature there from the Pollinator Pathway group. So stop by.